Okay, thank you. Is it okay if I speak in English? So there are a couple of things that I wanted to speak about regarding the caste census. So the first, around 8-9 things. So the first thing that we need to keep in mind is normally we understand the census as something that counts, but what is most important to remember is what it does not count. So the census is actually a double-edged sword. Okay. Why I'm saying the census is a double-edged sword is because it maps the entire population. A sample survey is a much smaller one. Okay. So what it does, the power of not getting counted, what we otherwise call invisibilization, that is the first thing that one has to understand. Now there's a very interesting range of scholarship on Latin America who actually show that in the Brazilian census, when they did not count people, what actually happens. You see, we only know about what gets counted. But I'm saying the dangerousness, the historical danger of not getting counted is something that invisibilizes you. Okay. Now this is linked to a historical context in the Indian scenario, which is the colonial census. Now often the problem has been, and this is a little bit of technicality, but it's not that much of a technicality for any of us in JNU, which is that there's actually a correspondence between jati and caste that is being made. That's one thing we need to understand and keep in mind, because you see, one can make this statement that before the colonial understanding and use of census, there is no caste in India. It's a jati pratha run by a jati tattva. It's a jati pratha. There's biradari, there's gotra, everything, but it's jati. Okay. Now, for good or bad, what the census does, and that's the point for us to remember actually, is that it looks at this mapping and then draws it into castes. Okay. Now, why does this happen? One is that the early gatekeepers, obviously, you can imagine who would be the early gatekeepers, subservient sections to the British colonial masters, the Brahmins. They essentially do this simplification, which the colonial census takers actually understand, because caste, in a historical sense, the system of castas is what was found in Portugal. It was in operation in Portugal, which is basically, and it was there all across Western Europe as well, which is that status at birth, by and large, depending on how much land you have, how much wealth you have, how close to the king and monarchy you are, it gives you a system. Even in Japan, you have a similar system. Okay, in many other places, you have very similar systems. So the reference point of castes becomes an important break in the use by the colonial census to understand this society. Okay. Now I'll come back to this point later. So what is actually happening is, and that is something that has come up in the recent discussions around what happened in the SECC, the Socio-Economic Caste Census of 2011, was that there are so many castes and it's unmanageable, etc. Actually, what people are doing is that they're mapping thousands and lakhs of jatis into 4 castes. Now again, this comes from a very varnashram dharma kind of an understanding. Okay. So this correspondence has to be remembered, because what the data has been collected is what the census makers understood as people belonging to this caste. It's not necessarily that people thought themselves to be of this caste. Okay. So this gatekeeping actually and this correspondence leads to a little bit of a complication which continues till date. Okay. So the invisibilization part as well as this, these two create a certain kind of a confluence. Now this is from a situation where we are thinking the rulers, this is how they are looking at us. But there's a confluence from within. as well. That's what we need to understand. And instead of going too back into history, let's just look at 1947 and the period around that. The first confluence is this Nehruvian idea that we are secular, okay, or that this idea that we are Indian. Now, which has to paper over all the divisions that could be there, possibly, okay. This is one kind of view, or let's say a majoritarian nationalist kind of view. There's also this orthodox Marxist kind of view, that it's purely class and nothing else. That these two actually come together. There's one set which says it's secular and modern, and hence we don't have those kind of divisions. The other says the primary contradiction is class, and we don't have those. And the third, which is other religion, non-Hindu other religions, who would also want to claim that we don't have caste, okay. These three actually work in a very interesting way to create this kind of an idea that we don't need to play up caste, okay. Now, just a point to also think through is that my contention is, and there are a lot of us here who know it, that actually the caste column is there in the census. It has always been there, okay. We are not asking for anything new. The caste column is always there in the census. The caste column has been used beautifully by the British to understand how to divide us and rule us. That's what they used to use it for. From 1947, caste has been collected. But what they do is, this comes under Official Secrets Act, so you can't ask for it. So from 1951 to now, you won't be able to look at it much because it's there, but it's officially invisibilized. Now, given this kind of a situation, what it does is that it actually puts Indian policy making and developmental policy making into a bit of a bind, which is that in terms of policy from 51 onwards, or developmental planning onwards, India actually embarked on a situation to see redistribution, that is redistribution of income or wealth, welfareist policies like that, and affirmative action policies as two separate things. And they should be two separate things, right? Because affirmative action is based on groups. Redistribution policies are based on class, okay? Now, once you invisibilize it, you can keep this separate, okay? And there is a reason why this separation actually serves certain purposes, okay? The other thing that it does is that it also invisibilizes the category called general. And that's something that they actually don't want most of us to know, right? So, the block called general is an invisible amorphous general. The two which are largely due to Ambedkar and other kind of efforts that happened, which are collated, was the schedules in terms of caste and tribe, and that's what continues. That, again, just to remember, is a correspondence from many, let's say, untouchable castes, low castes, into one set called scheduled castes or scheduled tribes, okay. So, in a certain sense, affirmative action, if you make policies which are non-evidence based, the best example is this, that we are using an extrapolation from 1931 census even today. But you see, people are dynamic categories, groups are dynamic categories, they change. So obviously they would have increased or decreased, but we need to have the evidence for it. But if you don't have the evidence for it, what you actually manage to do is that you don't have an actual evidence of affirmative action, what you are basing it on, and the second, you are managing very, very well to invisibilize the general category, okay. Now, if one has to then go into a little bit of a detail regarding this idea, and if one takes it further, then one can see that there are certain things that are actually hidden once you don't see the data like this, which is that which groups are controlling what? Are they controlling it over a period of time? Are they controlling it for some period of time? This confluence, this overlap, is something that gets denied if you don't have the evidence. The second thing that gets, so I'm talking about a pure overlap. That is, social status and economic status might have an overlap. But if you don't get data on social status, you will not be able to correspond it. Okay, it will be hearsay. It will be just an academic discussion saying, we know there's an overlap, but you can't prove it. The second is, there's a process which comes out of it, which is the intersection or the interlocking of various inequalities, social, economic. That evidence, you can't make the last leap. So you can go 99 steps, you will not be able to make the last step. Okay? Now, overlaps and intersections will not happen if there is no evidence based on that. Okay? So that will be very difficult for anybody to make sense and say something substantively. Okay? Now let's see what is the confluence today. I spoke about the confluence in 1947. What is the confluence today? If we are to take the majority Hindu identity, this gets ruptured. The moment we go into caste, this will get ruptured. So there is the first idea of conflating, like the general category being invisible, now hyper-visibilizing the Hindu category requires that there is no dissension within that can be brought about. The second problem, which you can see here very easily, is that affirmative action happens if you are Hindu. So the reservations that you can avail of will only be availed of if you are Hindu Dalit, not from any other religion. It doesn't become that easy. Okay? So it again, the confluence with other religions claiming that we don't have caste like features, which is not true in our context. We have different churches, we have different practices, we have different all religions have this kind of a situation, and that we can understand very clearly from Ambedkar diffusion theory. When he spoke about caste in India's mechanism, genesis and development, I think there was one of the most searing intellectual inputs into understanding was the idea that caste will diffuse. You see, he said it very clearly that the moment caste Hindus start traveling outside the country, this will no longer remain a local problem. This will become a global problem, which is what you see today. The other thing which you can take forward from Ambedkar's analysis is to look at how it diffuses into other religions which are practiced in the subcontinent. So the quote that you've used, caste and religion both together now show a different kind of a confluence. So the Hindu confluence, in terms of a majority understanding, is also fed through by a non-Hindu confluence. Okay? The basis of that is religion. Okay? The second thing is, in terms of understanding this situation, needs a historic claim. So the glorious past claim will also get muddied if in 2021 we can see the practice of caste in such a way. Now actually, if you look at certain surveys, they very clearly show that people don't marry out of their religion, people don't cohabit, etc., etc. That is continuing till date. Okay? So this glorious legacy also starts coming out. The third is India's quote-unquote official position in the world, which is to do with the UN Conference on Discrimination that happened, where race-based discrimination and caste-based discrimination was being compared, and there was a global move to condemn caste-based discrimination as similar to race-based discrimination. What was India's official position? That race and caste are two separate categories. As if they are two different words. Obviously, they are two different categories. It's a sterile academic kind of an idea that caste and race are two sociologically different categories. Hence, you can't say the discrimination based on this and that are the same. Okay? And India effectively managed to do that in the global level and bring it out. So the confluence of external global standing, internal confluences, that also comes into play. Okay? The last thing I wanted to say is this idea of minority majority will actually also go for a toss, if you come to think of it. If 3% of the population is controlling most of the jobs that you happen to get in the public sector, is in the leadership role in most other sectors, then what it shows is this idea of the minority that is easily used politically can actually get challenged in commonsensical ways. People will then look at it very differently. Like in older times, people could say that the king has all the power. Blatant. It will become as blatant as that. Okay. So instead of the divide and rule policy, how can we unite and agitate? That's the point that one needs to think through. And there's a tradition, and I won't go back way back in the past. This idea of the correspondence that I was talking about also has a positive value, which is when you club together disparate jatis into a caste, that also unifies. Okay. Phule actually spoke about that. One of the first originators, Shudra Ati Shudra, is actually a confluence. Ambedkar takes that forward. Scheduled caste is an idea which unifies as well. Okay. There are issues with it. Let's say this goes on further to the Dalit Panthers, let's say using the word Dalit to bring a confluence and a unity. To the social justice movements of the 80s, 70s, 80s, there is a tradition which is actually actively fighting to visibilize this. Okay? And that we need to engage with in a much deeper detail to understand why this invisibilization and visibilization problem is happening. The last thing I'll do is, this is hypothesis. I'm an economist. I normally would use evidence to speak about it. But because it's invisibilized, let me just place a couple of hypotheses in terms of understanding this. So if caste has been used in every census, who is using it? Not you and me. If we are researchers, we want to use the data. We are not using it. Who is using it? Somebody is using it. And that's something we must understand. That's why I'm saying caste is being recorded and is being used, not by you and me as researchers, or anybody interested in researching will not be able to use it, but somebody is using it. Okay? And this is nothing to do with UPA or NDA. It's a confluence of interests. They had 2000, if you take the UPA, because I was unfortunately the advisor for the socio-economic caste census. I just finished my PhD in JNU, so I had all these ideas and I thought, if the census can change, then everybody can do this work. So they did actually fall for it, I guess, and do the census, but then they junked it. Okay, so much so that the advisors themselves never have seen the data. So it's not between UPA and NDA. There is a confluence that one must understand that this data was being used, and it's used at booth level. Let's understand very simply. We also do elections. It's booth level. It actually gives you data till that level. Okay, you can plan very well using that data. Okay, and if some people have used the data to do that, then other people will also do that. Now the problem is that if everybody starts asking for it and starts getting visibilized, then obviously there is a democratization to that use of the data. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.